Hello, welcome back to Killer Bites, your favorite show on the internet where we chat about true crime cases, and while we do, we pretend we're on MasterChef. To break it down, we cook while we talk about crime. Is it a little weird? Maybe. But in the KB kitchen, we like to eat and we like to educate. That's why our brains are so big. So today I'm going to fill you in on the Murdaugh murders while I make a sweet potato, okra, and chickpea gumbo. If you're hungry and want to cook along with me, the recipe is in the description box below. You know how they say money can't buy you happiness? Whoever said that must have never lived in a studio apartment in LA. But for the wealthy and well-connected, sometimes money just isn't enough. If you don't have your reputation, what do you have? Well, today we're talking about Alex Murdaugh and his tangled web of mysterious deaths and insurance fraud, and how it led to the end of his wife and son. This case is super recent with new developments still coming in, so this is what we know thus far. Buckle up, folks. We're going for a bumpy ride. To get things started, I'm going to start off by heating oil in a pan and sauteing onions. We're covering the wealthy legal dynasty from South Carolina, the Murdaugh family. The Murdaughs have been prosecutors in South Carolina for a very long time. And by a long time, I mean for almost an entire freaking century. Since the 1910s, the family had been huge in the legal and political world, having someone in the family as a district attorney or prosecutor at any given time. They also owned a personal injury firm, which was one of the state's most prominent. So this family is well known, a little feared, and incredibly powerful. And what are most people who have all of those traits? Filthy, stinking rich. Well, that's where we get into Alex Murdaugh. Alex came from a long line of super rich people and wanted to continue the wealth for himself and eventually for his family. In 1993, Alex married a woman named Maggie Brunstetter. A year later, he graduated from USC and joined the family business. A few years after that, in 1996, they welcomed their first child into the world, Richard Alexander, but they called him Buster. And then in 1999, their second child, Paul, was born. And these kids grew up comfortably. Isn't that what all rich people say? I'm not rich, I just live comfortably. And then they come home to an indoor pool and an elevator, you know? The boys grew up loving the outdoors, and it helped that their family just so happened to own a 1,700 plus acre hunting property where they could vacation and spend time in nature. Sounds like a pretty legit childhood if you ask me. The thing about the Murdaugh family is accidents seem to follow them around wherever they were. For example, in February of 2018, the family housekeeper Gloria lost her life from falling down the stairs. She had been employed by the Murdaughs for over 20 years. She was in a coma for 3 weeks after the fall and eventually passed away from her injuries at just 57 years old. In her obituary, Gloria said she loved Alex, Maggie, and their two boys like they were her own family. So that just goes to show how close they were. And Alex went as far to tell Gloria's son that he would take the blame, sue himself, and use the money to make sure they were provided for. But they never received any funds from the Murdaughs, which, if you ask me, is pretty freaking shady, right? Sure, this could have just been a terrible accident, but this woman has known you for 20 plus years. Now I'm going to add in celery and green bell peppers. But once you cover enough of these stories, you know that accidents usually have a lot more going on behind the scenes. At this time, the Murdaughs' youngest son, Paul, was getting into trouble with law enforcement for minor things here and there. He was a student at USC, just like his old man, trying to get his degree in criminology. But despite his college major, he would be involved with the police over a half dozen times, and usually these run-ins involved underage drinking and boating. These kids were avid boaters and were known to take their parents' boat for a spin pretty often. Well, in February of 2019, Paul would find himself in yet another boating and drinking accident. But this time, it would prove fatal for passengers on board. That night, Paul, his girlfriend, and a few of their friends took his parents' boat out to an oyster roast. I had to look up what an oyster roast was. Apparently, you aren't supposed to roast oysters. The traditional way is to steam them open. The more you know. Come back next week for more oyster facts. Paul used his older brother's ID to buy some beer for the hangout, where they all proceeded to get really, really drunk. Paul and his friend even docked the boat at one point to take 2 rounds of shots. They stayed at the roast for a few hours, but it was pitch black outside by the time they went to leave. Everyone was practically begging for anyone else to drive the boat besides Paul. He clearly had a lot to drink and was acting belligerent. His girlfriend said that he spat on her and slapped her. He was screaming and just acting like a complete and total prick. But Paul drove the boat anyway. It didn't have any lights, so the passengers on board took turns using their flashlights to navigate back home. I don't know how many times I have to say it, do not drink and drive. This goes for boats, planes, trains, and automobiles. It's not freaking worth it, and I know you know that. Don't be dumb. Based on GPS tracking data, the boat was seen accelerating rapidly and then running into the base of the bridge. 3 passengers were thrown from the boat, including a 19-year-old girl named Mallory Beach, whose body could not be found. Everyone was rushed to the hospital immediately, and when Alex got there to check on his son, he saw that Paul was shackled to his bed. His blood alcohol levels were 3 times the legal limit in South Carolina. 3 times. The family filed a wrongful death claim against Paul as he was under the influence when driving the boat. They also sued Alex and Buster. Alex because he was the owner of the boat, and Buster because it was his ID that was used to purchase the drinks. Now I'm going to add in okra and peppers. On March 3rd, nearly a week after the boating incident, search and rescue teams scoured the area looking for Mallory. Eventually, her body was found in a nearby marsh. The family was in some pretty hot water, like scorching, boiling hot water. Paul was indicted on DUI charges and pleaded not guilty to all of them. The nerve of some people. But because there seems to be no final agreement, the trial was pushed back. The Murdaugh's legal troubles were building up because of Paul's choices. Insurance companies were coming in from left and right, hammering the family with lawsuits. To Alex's surprise, Paul wasn't even covered under his insurance policy, and they were looking at over $6 million worth of damages. After 2 years of battling in court, the judge sided with the insurance company. And I just want to add that many people, prosecutors, judges, etc., refused to work on this case because the family has a history with almost everyone in town. So the fact that this actually got some movement on it is highly impressive. But the legal fees and lawsuits kept piling up. This was a significant hit to the Murdaugh's financial stability. And I want to feel bad, but your son accidentally executed a girl because he was drunk and reckless. I don't know what you want me to say. From this point on, things would continue to fall apart for the Murdaughs, and fast. In 2020, they sold their home and started living in the family beach house full-time soon after. In 2021, which is wild because this is so recent and still unraveling, Alex's father's health would be on the fast decline due to his cancer. Buster, the oldest son, was kicked out of school for plagiarism. Paul would continue to get in trouble for boating-related stuff, all while dealing with a lawsuit for a boating incident. Some people never learn. However, he would never spend a day in jail for the accident. Many people have attributed this to the family's high status and the fact that they are the law in the area. They've been the law for the past century, you know? But on June 7th, 2021, Alex called the police around 10 p.m. begging for an ambulance. Paul and Maggie had been fatally hit with 2 different weapons. Trigger warning, graphic descriptions of violence. Paul had 2 wounds from a firearm at close range, once in the head and once in the chest. Maggie suffered multiple wounds from an automatic weapon. Things continued to unravel as Alex's father, Randolph, passed away at age 81 just 3 days later. And if you weren't thinking things couldn't possibly get worse, I don't know why you would think that. Things get much worse and weirder. Now I'm going to add in chickpeas, hot sauce, tomatoes, and a spice mixture. While all of this was going down, the police were still working on the double homicide case. As they were digging, they stumbled upon info regarding a hit-and-run accident involving Buster's former classmate, Stephen Smith. That's right, there is someone else in the mix. It's so much to wrap your head around. And like we've heard before, people assume that the Murdaughs had something to do with it and were covering their badonkadonks. But the incident happened in 2015, and by that point, they had hidden any traces exceptionally well. No one was arrested for the crime. Because of Paul's passing, all charges were dropped against him in the case against Mallory. This is just a side note, but one of the survivors of the boating crash said the cops tried to sway them to blame someone else. This was an attempt to shift the focus from Paul to someone else, and I can't help but feel like this is because he held that Murdaugh name, you know? That's like being a Kardashian or JoJo Siwa. People give you special treatment when you're well known. Okay, I feel like I should do a quick check-in at this point. How are we all feeling? I know I just threw a lot of information at you. The story isn't cut and dry, okay? There are a lot of layers. There's so many different twists and turns, and if you can, go back and watch this video at half speed just to make sure you're caught up on everything. Now that you feel all centered again, get ready for me to throw a wrench in that because things get even crazier. Early September of 2021, it was reported that Alex Murdaugh had been hit in the head with a bullet while he was changing a tire on his vehicle. I know. What the hell is even going on in South Carolina? He was taken to a hospital and seemed to be fine. He was awake, conscious, and talking normally. At that point, people were getting even more suspicious of what was really going on with the family. Did Alex try to take his own life? Did someone have a hit on him? What was going on? And I gotta say, people were quick to call him out on his BS. They were dragging this man through the mud, saying that you could only see his gunshot injuries if you lifted up his hair. I mean, hey, when someone's playing dumb, you gotta play dumb right back. The sad thing is, so many families were affected by this family. They just couldn't receive justice because the justice system favored whoever had the family name and the money. Alex put out a statement saying he was checking himself into a rehabilitation center and leaving his job at the law firm. But later that same day, his law firm came forward and accused him of stealing money, or misappropriated funds, which is the fancy term for stealing money. With all of this, the state ended up revoking Alex's law license, obviously, and I guess once you no longer work to uphold the law, you can do whatever you want to manipulate it to your benefit. Many people assumed that Alex had injured himself and tried to pin it on someone else. People are not far off with their judgments on this man, I'll give them that. However, it was proved that someone else was responsible for the incident, but Alex might have been involved. I know, I feel like nothing surprises me at this point. Or I'm just in a constant state of shock and am coping with it surprisingly well. Well, if you guessed that Alex was behind his injury, you would be correct. Ding ding ding, you win a new car. Just kidding. He hired a man to assist him in his suicide, and he did this because he wanted his son to be able to collect his life insurance policy. With everything going on, finances were pretty strung out, and inheriting a $10 million life insurance policy could make things a lot comfier for Buster. 61-year-old Curtis Smith was arrested after Alex admitted to hiring him to end his life to collect the insurance money. Something tells me that if money wasn't involved, the authorities wouldn't care so much. But what authorities didn't know is that Curtis Smith was one of Alex's dope dealers. Behind the scenes, Alex had been addicted to opioids. But he was released on a $20,000 bond and is currently spending his time at an inpatient rehab facility in Georgia, which is all covered under insurance. Now I'm going to add in peanut butter and vegetable broth. Just as recently as September 15th, 2021, Alex Murdaugh was placed as the chief defendant in the wrongful fatality of his former housekeeper, Gloria. The housekeeper's sons had no clue that a settlement had been reached, and they still haven't received any money from the Murdaughs. Imagine your mother passing mysteriously, and you're positive you know who is involved, but they continue to get away with it, living in beach houses, while you can't even get justice. That has to be so frustrating for the victims' families. Both of Gloria's sons work modest jobs, one as a bagger at a grocery store and another as a hospital storeroom attendant. However, they aren't giving up their fights, and they said that Alex Murdaugh should be arrested and remain in custody until he pays them the total amount they deserve from the settlement. Some great news to come out of this story is that a criminal investigation is being opened for Gloria's passing. So eventually, Curtis Smith came forward and alleged that Alex set him up. He considered their relationship to be like that of brothers. Is this true, or do we think he just wants a way out of this mess? And while all of this blows up in our faces in real time, the search for the criminal responsible for the slayings of Maggie and Paul is still underway. Spokespeople from the Murdaugh family offered a $100,000 reward for anyone to come forward with leads, but alas, no one has come forward. Here's the thing, I think there is a lot more that is going to come out about this case. I know, how could there be any more? I'm serious though. The FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office have been contacted because there was recently discovered evidence about potential uncovered crimes on top of everything else we know thus far. And I'm sure you can see how deep this rabbit hole goes, but some people are still left with questions and zero answers for their own families. Like Sandy, the mother of Stephen Smith, who tragically passed away in the hit-and-run accident. She is raising money to finally get her son's grave a headstone. Gosh, it is so easy to get caught up in the intensity of these stories and forget about reality for a second. Sometimes we glance over the very real people affected by these terrible crimes, which is why it's important to be an active member of the true crime community. There are a bunch of different ways to get involved, but number one, support the families. If you feel so inclined and you want to help, look up the families involved with the case, like the Smith family and the sons of Gloria Setterfield, to see what they need. Well, everyone, that's all I have for you on this case, for now. Things are still developing, so we shall wait and see how this one pans out. In the meantime, I'm gonna grub on this glorious gumbo. Until the next episode.